What we're going to do with you today is just give you some examples of our use of a managed learning environment to support our first year engineering degree students on a fluid mechanics. And
what you can see in front of you is the front page for our module. And this is a module in fluids and thermo. And our module involves the normal face-to-face teaching, but also has all these resources on our MLE. And if you look down the left-hand side, you can see the sorts of resources that we have. But the MLE is not just used for resources, it's also used for communication. So there are opportunities, like you can see the discussion on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side you can see latest items like a news item or entries that have recently put onto the VLE. And then in the middle you can see that we have a picture. Well, what we do is we make this dynamic. We don't want to think of the VLE as a static environment. And we change the picture, or we might add a question, something that's linked with the work that's actually going on in the lectures or in the tutorials, so that we're really trying to integrate our VLE with our face-to-face teaching. You can see within the structure, with all the resources, that one of the things that the VLE is really good for is managing those resources. So it's an environment that helps us to communicate, it helps us to store resources, and it helps us to manage those resources. And the way we use it in integrating with face-to-face is really important. We spent quite a lot of time trying to stimulate the use of the discussion area because we believe that it's very important for the students to communicate with themselves, to collaborate, to learn from each other, as well as communicate with us. And the sorts of things we do is we can prompt discussion through providing additional information. Or we might take an example, say, that students have been struggling with in tutorials, and we might provide prompts in the discussion to help students solve those problems and to trigger ideas that they might share with each other. Actually, one of the things we do, we think it's really important to tell students what to expect. So we actually tell them, if they put a question on the discussion, we say that they're going to get a response within a certain time. And for us, we've chosen 48 hours. And yes, that does mean that we might be working on a Sunday evening.
I'll just jump in there, Peter, but what that also does is it manages the email traffic that we get, but actually now we don't get as much email as we used to stimulate all of that traffic and all of that engagement through the managed learning environment rather than responding individually to students' questions.
And we actually use the discussion area for that communications much more effectively. Let's go a bit further into some of the details and look at these teaching resources in a bit more detail. If you look down that list on the left-hand side, you can see that they're folders. We typically put lecture notes into some of those folders. We put other media.
The importance of folders shouldn't be underestimated because what we found is it's not just important to provide students with a range of resources and a range of different formats of resources, but it's really important that you give students a way that they can navigate through those resources, locate them easily, relocate them, and situate them alongside appropriate parts of the course. And the WHATS, for instance, is part of the assessment, and that's got its own folder, so the students know where they go to pick up their assessments for this module. So I'll just briefly show you what we've been doing with the WHATS and just show you how we integrate that with the managed learning environment. So I would click on the WHATS folder and it would open up a whole series of other folders underneath that includes both the delivery of these tasks and some feedback to those tasks. And here is an example of our weekly assessed tutorial sheet. I'm not going to spend too much time talking around them, but just to say that it was a project funded by the Engineering Subject Centre that allowed us to engage our students every week with student unique tasks. And you can see the student uniqueness by the data that's embedded within the task and highlighted by the red circles here. We provide the students these tasks through the managed learning environment, such that they then come to the managed learning environment, they print out their own sheets, they go away from the managed learning environment, go away from the classroom and solve this problem in a time and at a place that best suits them. Then they're submitting their data and they would then come back to the managed learning environment for some feedback and as well for some discussion around how well they've done in responding to that task. Interestingly, just picking Peter's point earlier about the use of discussion forums, just locating the assessments within the managed learning environment has been really important for dragging the students back so we can get them re-engaged in discussions, get them picking up the news items, get them looking at the new recent resources. But also it gives them a location where they're picking up the assessment tasks and having a central area where they can discuss those assessment tasks both with their peers and with their students.
I think that there's something else to mention about the managed learning environment, how it integrates with other resources in the university. You'll notice on the left, I think that there's a link to the reading list, for example. And the reading list is if you click on that item, what it would immediately take you into is the reading list for this particular module, which is then linked with the Voyager system, our library resources system, so that you can immediately reserve a book, or you know if a book's in the library. So, and you can personalise that reading list as well. So it's another really good feature about how we're integrating our VLE into the other university resources and really making it a managed learning environment. Well, let's look at some of the other things that I mentioned. Lecture notes. Well, that's typically text-based material or PowerPoint slides, but we also use other media. One example is podcasting. What we did in this particular year, we recorded some of the lectures. In fact, this lecture that's being pointed at now is the audio recording of the review lecture, the last lecture before the exam. And we felt that the students needed access to the resource in a flexible way. So we recorded the lecture. We then actually put it into the resources in the managed learning environment. And in our managed learning environment, you can switch on the podcasting so that you can push this material down to the students' iPods. So it's a really useful feature and illustrates this other point about flexibility. Well, there's one more example I think I'd like to talk about, and that's all the materials which we actually recorded. And we did this in online tutorials. We decided again that to offer the students more flexibility. Typically in this module, students have face-to-face tutorials, but we felt that it would be useful to give them a chance to attend online tutorials at different times of the day. And in fact, this was actually offered to them in the evening. And the other advantage we felt is that you can actually record it, and you can see by the screenshot that this is actually a screenshot of an Illuminate session. We're actually using Illuminate for this recording now. And we were all dispersed, so I was actually doing this from my home. The students were in their halls of residence or anywhere that they felt appropriate. And Mark also joined as well, and was joining in from his home. And I was using my tablet, so I could actually go through the solution of the problem. And we were working with students, so students were joining in that solution. And this is one of the key points. The students have been asking for worked examples, and we felt that we wanted to actually show the students our thought processes and capture their thought processes in producing this teaching material, so that they were much clearer on the problem-solving approach that we were wanting to encourage them to take, rather than just give them some printed text that they could look through and think they understood. And this was a really powerful media. And then we actually put it into the MLE. You can see that there's a link on the left-hand side, which is to the online tutorials. And so this recording just appeared in there as a web address. The students clicked on it, they got to the recording, and they could look at it in their own time, at their own pace. And it was really, really popular and really good preparation, especially for examinations. And one last point I wanted to make, that the students actually were communicating with each other more than if they'd been in the classroom face-to-face by using the chat box in Illuminate. And that's a really powerful media. The students probably are used to using text messaging, and they found they were really comfortable with that communication. And you could see their comments about what they found difficult, how they were solving problems. And it was a really, really interesting use of this resource.
And it's really important to not just provide the students with data, but provide the students with resources, or preferably activities, and actually to go explore how well the students are engaging with those resources, go and find out which resources the students seem to have more appetite in using, and actually explore when and where they are using those resources. And one of the things that Peter spoke about with this podcasting, for instance, and that Illuminate session, was that not only can we record it, so we get an opportunity for the students to revisit that in a time that suits them, but it saves us a little bit of time as well, so we don't actually have to go through and rerun that tutorial session in a face-to-face context. So it's useful to go and find out how well the students are engaging, so we can try to encourage colleagues to do the same thing. What our managed learning environment does, probably like other managed learning environments nowadays, is provide us with a monitoring data that allows us to explore how many accesses this particular module site has seen, in this instance, over the last 7 days, which is helpful to see that the students are constantly engaged. Here you've got 130, 180 accesses. But also we can unpack this data and look at particular individual resources and find out which resources the students are accessing and which ones are being accessed. We can also slice that data another way and look at the students and see how well engaged the individual students are with their studies through the managed learning environments, and just identify opportunities to have an additional dialogue about student study behaviours, for instance. So it's been really helpful, not only in terms of using the managed learning environments to provision resources and activities, but to then revisit those resources and see how well the students are doing in picking them up and using them and utilising them to support their learning. Structuring the resources that we provide for our students, and I think that's true for most of the students that we experience, and that's why we created that highly structured approach in terms of the use of folders, etc., and subfolders, folders within folders. And we're also finding, even though we're getting increased numbers of students entering higher education, more of an interest in trying to develop a personalised approach to learning. And you've seen some of that activity through the managed learning environment with our individual assessment approach, with the approach Peter spoke about with his online synchronous discussions through Illuminate, for instance, where even though we've got a massive higher education system at the moment, we've still got an opportunity to provide what students need and what they like, which is that personalised approach. The monitoring data provides us with a great opportunity to see what the students are doing and what resources seem to be more effective and which resources seem to be least effective, for instance. We've also found that this isn't just about supporting those students that are struggling or that have little or perhaps little experience of higher education or first generation students, but the managed learning environments give us a great opportunity to stretch those students that are doing well. The additional materials, for instance, and the opportunity for them to have an increased dialogue with their peers and with their teachers has been really helpful, and our higher performing students also benefit from our use of the managed learning environment. Now, we've been tracking performance from many perspectives, both in terms of student satisfaction questionnaires and in terms of their overall performance on the module, and we've definitely seen, or we definitely believe we've got evidence to support the fact that we have improved student performance, not necessarily from our use of the managed learning environment, but more from the coupling of our use of the managed learning environment with our traditional face-to-face teaching sessions. And that would be what we would consider as blended learning. Now that clearly presents us with challenges, but what it allows us to do is it allows us to think about how we use the managed learning environment to either extend the classroom, enhance the classroom, and indeed in some instances replace some of the classroom activity. And so we see that the important point here is the integration of the virtual learning environment or managed learning environment with the classroom is the key to supporting the students' learning and also to allow staff and teachers to manage their time much more effectively.